Welcome to Season 2 of Minding the Gap, Conversations on Gender. As global gender equality decreases, it is critical to share lessons as we work to turn the tide. From migration to sustainability and politics, we're exploring topics where gender is often overlooked, but inspiring stories emerge. You can listen to the entire series, including the first season, on all the major podcasting platforms, as well as our website at ecdpm.org.
Just because you have a circular economy doesn't mean it is more gender just. We do see that in certain initiatives that are happening that you can consider as circular, they allow women to have more flexible work time so that they can actually do family work and work which they're getting paid for. That is still very stressful. It still means that they have to work very hard, but at least it allows them to participate in a labor market.
Good morning. I'm Nadia Ashraf. I work at ECDPM on sustainable supply chains and circular economy. I'm happy to be joined here today by Katharina Gihring. She is the Strategic Program and Operations Lead at the African Circular Economy Network. Today, we will talk about gender and circular economy. We will look at the ways to support women to ensure that they benefit from a transition to a circular economy. Good morning, Katharina.
Hi, Nadia. Thanks for inviting me today. Maybe I can quickly introduce the African Circular Economy Network. We are a continental-wide network in Africa. We have around about representation in 42 African countries, made up of 500 circular economy experts in Africa, but we're also very strongly collaborating with organizations such as yours to facilitate a just transition, because obviously that is a lot of the focus that we have to spend on in Africa to create socioeconomic opportunities.
Katharina, can you start with maybe a brief explanation of what a circular economy is?
Everyone interprets it a little bit different. And at the heart, a circular economy is a restorative and regenerative system that is decoupling economic growth from the use of resources. And we strongly also follow the three principles that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has put forward, which is eliminating waste and pollution, circulating products and materials. And I would always say also use less, right? We can't exponentially grow. That is just not physically possible from the planet and the resources that we have available. And then also regenerate nature. And I would always say nature includes us humans. So it's also regenerating our societies, communities, and the individual.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Maybe you could also introduce a bit the Just Transition project that you're working on.
Yeah, so the Just to CE project is a Horizon 2020 funded project. So it has a very strong research component to it. The Just to CE project main aim is to really look at how just is the circular economy and the narrative and the research narrative around to make then policy recommendations. We see that a lot of discussion are now happening around the labor dimension, because just because something is a circular job doesn't mean it is a fair job or a decent job, but there hasn't been as much done around the gender and environmental justice component. So this is what the project is shaping.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for that. That's super interesting. And a follow-up question on that, because obviously just transition is the heart of what we're talking about also today. Let's start with where we are right now. So what kind of activities are women actually involved in the current, so to say, circular economy?
I think it depends, obviously, if you're looking at the global north versus the global south. We see that within the global south, the narrative is still very much focused around waste. What we currently see from a global south perspective, a lot of women and men are involved in waste collection that are considered as circular jobs. But the problem there is also within being a waste picker or waste reclaimer, women are usually disadvantaged. So they have access to less valuable products that they collect or that they sort through the waste. But we do need to start speaking more about getting women involved. And I mean, that's what the research says. It's predicted to create more jobs for women in the workforce. But we also need to make sure that this is actually happen, right? And at the moment, we see that obviously women are mostly involved in unvalued activities related to care and domestic work. And also community-based reuse and certain repair practices of clothing, for example. But we do really need to see that the conversation is not just waste, but that we also look at that whole reuse, repair, maintenance sector, and actually also have women being part of those initiatives, right? Because usually those initiatives might be a little bit more technical. And that might already be a barrier for women to participate, because we see that females aren't as engaged in the STEM, so the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field as men are. We also see it from a South African perspective. So in quarter two in 2023, we had like an unemployment rate of 32.6%. But Black African women have usually face a much worse unemployment rate of 39.8% in the same quarter. And I've just picked up one of like the definition of the International Labour Organization, that they very much emphasize that women are usually in vulnerable employments. That means that it is a combination of own account work and contribution to family work, or unpaid household members, both defined as employment statuses that are associated with low levels of development and high levels of poverty. So women greatly contribute to society through care work, taking care of children, taking care of sick family members or elderlies, but they're not being paid for that, even though it is a crucial part of our society and how we thrive as society. So I think within the research, we have very much question around how do we perceive norms or social status and what do we value? And that's why it's very clear that at the moment, women are taking part in the low valued economy instead of the high valued economy, which is more the manufacturing sector, for example.
Maybe can you say a bit more about the fact that women are more involved in family work and reproductive activities as compared to men, obviously, and how does that change when there is a more circular economy? Does having a more circular economy have an impact on that?
Yeah, I think it's all how we set up a circular economy, or how a circular economy business model is also being set up, right? Just because you have a circular economy doesn't mean it is more gender just. It has to be designed into the system. So that's why we speak about a systems approach or a systems change. We do see that in certain initiatives that are happening that you can consider as circular, they allow women to have more flexible work time so that they can actually do family work and work which they're getting paid for. That is still very stressful. It still means that they have to work very hard, but at least it allows them to participate in a labor market than before, where they had to basically do work here and there to gain some type of income. And obviously, if we speak about income, that also means that females are independent, right? And they can become financially independent. So it's really, really crucial also to teach about skills around financial literacy. So I think it's almost also thinking about circular economy, but also what skills do we need to transfer, not from just a technical perspective, but also what leads to independence for women in general.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe to add to your previous point, the fact that women are predominantly in the low value economy, it's also very high for instance, for waste, because I was reading somewhere that for Ghana, in the plastic recycling value chain, almost 70% of the waste sorters are actually women. So there's quite a clear difference between men and women when it comes to sort of low value activities and high value activities. And maybe my next question is follows up on that, and you've already answered that to a certain extent. What would then be a just and inclusive transition to a circular economy, both for low value activities, so waste, but also more for production and reuse and consumption?
So maybe I can give more the scientific answer in the beginning. So this would really require us to require decisive intervention of the public sector in challenging gender norms. So that would mean by assessing higher social value and investing more resources in reproductive and care work. So for example, nursing and education, than in the manufacturing sector. So also satisfying more human needs and having less material throughput, right? Because with a circular economy, we're also trying to obviously decrease consumption and more handle our resources more efficiently. I would say that from our local context here, education is absolutely key. And that means also ensuring girls to attend school for the full duration, also when they have, for example, their menstruation. We're still speaking about period poverty here, where girls are not attending school because they don't have access to feminine hygienic products, really being able to access education. And later on, if they do have family, also being able to actually continue their professional development. And those opportunities are unfortunately they're there, but they're also very slim. And that, again, I would say a lot is to do around education that is applicable. So it's not just a technical education part that we're speaking, but also around the soft skills.
And do you see there being a shift in terms of gender dimensions actually being included in circular economy strategies and policies?
Yeah, I think this is I find this a very difficult question to answer. What we see is that most of the gender strategies in the circular economy are informed by equal opportunities approaches. So it's basically aiming at adding more women into the high tech or the circular economy sector in general, rather than transforming our social values and questioning our norms and what we value and what we don't really value at the moment. So it's more giving equal opportunities, but it still doesn't speak about the low economic value contribution the low economy that female participate in. If we speak from circular economy and implementing circular economy principles, it's how you design a service or a product, right? And those products and services, I think, always need to be designed with keeping in mind what is the end game, what's the end user actually needing, requiring from a community perspective as well, right? So it's also rethinking how do we create circular economy business models that actually fulfills the needs of a community. Are we then speaking about a sharing economy, right? Again, South Africa is very dependent on cars or taxis for moving people around. But a lot of cars also stand around. But I'm not sure if a car sharing system would work here, just out of security risks as well. So I think we need to constantly question or ask those critical questions. What do community needs? Do communities need to have access to certain electronic devices to make maybe the labor within the household less as well? Can we set up certain systems to facilitate that?
Yeah, that's very interesting, because when you talk about community needs, I think the fact that in terms of the needs of the community, it's different for different genders. And I agree with the example of the car sharing, because, for instance, in Pakistan, we have a car sharing model, but it doesn't always suit women because there are different security concerns around that. So, and that's maybe not really considered when we design business models, circular business models, for instance, sharing and reuse. So that's a good example, and that leads me to the second second last question. How do we ensure that the opportunities for circular economy are actually equally distributed between all genders?
Yeah, it's a massive question, and I'm not sure if I have the right answer, but I guess it's asking our norms, and again, asking how do we perceive value and what do we value within our societies? Because obviously our society is very much focused on GDP and production outputs, right? And as I said before, not so much of what happens in households and how people actually take care of one another. I do think, maybe from my previous experience as well, that also creating curriculum and training that speaks to women and girls, because they also learn differently. But I mean, this is highly generalized, right? Everyone learns differently, but between the genders, we learn differently. But it's also removing maybe the stigma around certain skills that are more assigned towards males and females, including really trying to make females excited about science, tech, engineering, and the manufacturing sector, the STEM components, because we do lack those critical skills in this field quite a lot.
And are there some low-hanging fruits, so in the sense, sort of short-term opportunities that are more applicable for women? Because obviously I fully understand education would be the key sort of solution to this problem. But what is something that we could do in the short term that can actually support women to take advantage of these opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's also, it speaks to which age group are we looking at, right? I think we have visited one initiative which is producing reusable pads for women. so that girls are also participating in school. That's rather like, again, low-hanging fruit. I would say critically what we see, but this is not just speaking to women, this is also speaking to males, to facilitate workplace learnings, because we see that learners, even if they come out of school, high school, for example, or they have gone through vocational training, that they're not necessarily ready for the industry. So there is a skills gap. I think workplace learnings is one thing that could actually enable people to enter the workforce and obtain a job that then is actually supporting a wider network of families and the children included. I'm just not sure if that is like a low-hanging fruit. It is conducted, but we see that there is not enough opportunities. And the problem is there, the funding around that, right? Workplace learnings requires the learners to usually also be paid in our context as well. And not every company can do that, or there are not enough bursaries available. I would also say mentorships. It could be a link. It could be linked to workplace learnings, but in general have also mentorships in place, so that females are actually mentored around the skills that they also require, maybe to run their own business. And here I can speak of one initiative in South Africa. It's called Taking Care of Business. And what they have seen, or the gap that they have identified in the fashion sector, obviously we have a lot of waste and a lot of clothing that are not being sold, but that are in perfect condition. They basically take from the retailers, they debrand those clothing, and the women then actually start their little micro businesses around selling and marketing the clothing, usually more in an informal sector. But the program it's 2 years long. It also very much focuses on the financial skills, but also like on emotional skills and working through different type of soft skills. So that is a really, really interesting initiative. And especially once the females have like finished the training, they can still access the clothing for a reduced rate. So basically they can continuously make an income, and usually that income really enables them to send their children to better schools as well. So that already helps the next generation, right?
Thanks a lot for that. That gives a lot of interesting ideas for policymakers, but also other actors to work on. And my last question is on whether you have some recommendations on what partner countries, such as the EU, can do in this regard.
Thanks, Nadia. I think that's a really brilliant question. I think going back to the entire just transition discussion that are happening, I think from a European Union or from a partner country perspective, it's really looking, how is your country when the Netherlands, or for example, Germany is transitioning towards circular economy, how are they impacting other countries? Because obviously they have trade agreements in place, but they also have the value chains, the supply chains, which are interlinked. But just because one country transitions to a circular economy doesn't mean that is necessarily obviously happens in a partner country. And there we speak very strongly around the critical raw minerals that are required also for a transition, and where they're mined from, and they're mined a lot from the developing countries, also in Africa, quite a lot. So if we have a European Union that is completely neutral, carbon neutral, for example, and they have all the solar panels and wind farms in place, but then we don't have basically minerals left for other countries to transition, that becomes very complicated and complex. So I think it is very much being very cognizant of the fact that just because you transition yourself to a circular economy doesn't necessarily mean it is a just transition. And it can actually negatively impact other countries as well, which makes this highly complex.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yes, it's about sort of just global transition, not just transition in the EU or what country, which really needs to be at the heart of it, I think. Thanks a lot, Katharina, for joining us today. This was a very interesting conversation for me, and I hope also for our listeners today.
Thanks so much, Nadia. Really appreciate your time, and looking forward for the podcast and the other podcast series as well.